This was something that happened to me back in late August of 2016. I was taking a solo road trip driving from Montana to Oregon to attend my sister's wedding. I don't like planes, so if I can drive there, I will do so, even if it does take me longer. But I took a few extra days off work, left before my parents did because they were flying, and thought that I would just have a nice little trip by myself. The drive was going to be a little over 12 hours, so I expected to stop in between there once to sleep. The plan was to drive as far as I could, then sleep in my car at a rest stop. I ended up leaving a little later than I wanted, around noon, but I was finally out the door. The trip started fine. I had only stopped about 3 times. I was in a good mood and still had plenty of energy left in me. I had driven for about 8 hours and was now starting to wind down. The first half of the drive was going so smoothly that I was thinking that I might make the entire thing. But I knew that that was probably not going to happen. My eyes were starting to burn, and my back was killing me, so I knew I was going to have to stop. I rolled the window down to help keep me focused until I came across the next rest stop. The one I stopped at was pretty average. It had an older brick building with restrooms and a few vending machines inside. There were a few covered picnic tables and a small fenced-in dog park on the outside. So, pretty average looking and nothing really stood out. In fact, when I pulled in, my car was the only one there. There were no other cars in the lot and none on the truck side either, which wasn't really a surprise. It was a little after 9 when I finally stopped, so it was pretty late. This didn't bother me because I just needed a restroom and a place to park to sleep for a bit. I got out and stretched, which felt great, and used the restroom too, but here's where it got weird. As I was walking out and back to my car, I saw someone standing at the edge of the parking lot, just in the grassy part after it. But it wasn't just some person standing there, it was a clown with a full getup. He had the fluffy rainbow wig, the baggy jumpsuit with bright colors and shapes all over it, the big red nose, and the oversized red shoes. His face was even done up. It was painted white with a giant red smile and diamonds around his eyes, with over-exaggerated eyebrows. And he just stood there perfectly still like a statue, holding a single red balloon in his right hand with the other down to his side. When I tell you that I had the goosebumps, that is a fact, not just a saying. I felt the hair on my arms and neck stand up. I had stopped right at the edge of the sidewalk and stared at him. This clown wasn't moving either. There was a decent amount of distance between us, but I could still see his face clearly enough that I could tell that he wasn't smiling or frowning or anything, just a lights on but no one's home kind of stare. It didn't help much that he was standing under a light, which made it that much creepier. We both just stood motionless for what felt like hours. What the hell was he even doing there? There was no reason for a clown to be at that location. Not like anyone was having a kids' party at 9 p.m. at some random highway rest stop. And to make it worse, I broke eye contact long enough to look around and notice that there were still no cars in the parking lot. So how did he get there? I wasn't in the restrooms that long, but I suppose it was possible that someone dropped him off there? But why? On the off chance that someone else would be there to scare them? Then I did something that I still can't explain. Maybe it was the sleep deprivation. Maybe it was just a nervous instinct as a way to say, hey, I see you over there, but I raised my hand and waved. Just a little wave, almost without thinking about it. And as I waved at the strange rest stop clown, I thought to myself, what the hell are you doing? So I went to lower my hand, and to my surprise, the clown raised his hand and waved back. But it wasn't a slow, casual wave like mine was. It was an enthusiastic and theatrical gesture with his whole arm. Then, he smiled. And even from a distance, I could see his massive, exaggerated, toothy grin spread across his painted face. After waving like that for a few seconds, he dropped his arm back down and went back to that eerily still position. But the smile remained. Let me tell you, that was terrifying. To see someone smiling like that with no other bodily expressions, it was uncanny. Like I mentioned, the smile was way too forced, too wide, too fixed. Like someone who didn't know how to smile. That was enough for me. So I slowly walked toward my car, trying to sort out my keys without taking my eyes off of this clown. I reached toward my car and went to look at the door to insert the key, when the clown raised his right arm and let go of the balloon. I looked at him as he watched the balloon, which caused me to look up at it too. I watched it float up and up until the sky, until I saw some movement in the corner of my view, as well as heard shuffling toward me. I looked back down, and I saw that the clown was shuffling his feet quickly in my direction. He wasn't running, he wasn't even hardly walking. It was that little shuffle kids do without picking up their feet. I caught him in the act, getting just a little closer to me, but he stopped once we made eye contact again. I did not like that. I didn't like the idea of him approaching me, and I certainly didn't like that he tried that while I wasn't looking. The whole balloon thing made it seem like a distraction in a way, even if he was loud about it the entire time. So I unlocked my car without taking my eyes off of him, and his creepy smile, hopped in, and immediately locked my door. By the time it took me to start my car and put on my seatbelt, he had managed to get a lot closer to me, to the point that I may have hit him with my car door if I opened it. I slowly backed out of the spot, went around him, and got the hell out of there. I looked back once more as I drove away, and I saw him waving again, but it was more of a slow mechanical wave. I watched for quite some time, making sure that no one followed me from the rest stop. It seemed crazy because I still did not see a single car there, so it wouldn't make sense that someone would follow me. But that just made it all that much worse. I still had no idea where he came from. If he was standing there when I pulled in, I would have seen him, and probably wouldn't have stopped. I wouldn't say that I'm afraid of clowns, but I certainly am not a fan of them, so having this random clown standing around a dark rest stop was pretty freaking terrifying. Was that all he was planning on doing? Was to just stand around and freak people out? What was the purpose of trying to get closer to me? And what would have happened if he had? That experience woke me up enough to go another hour or so, until I stopped at a 24-hour gas station instead of sleep. There were no other events after the clown either, so that was preferred. Once I arrived at my sister's, I told her and a few other people over time what happened. It just became one of those creepy and unexplained things that I was unlucky enough to experience. It wasn't until a few years later that I realized there was this whole clown pandemic thing, and after watching a video about it, I realized that it took place around the same time that I saw that clown at the rest stop. And I wonder if that is what he was doing there. Was it just a copycat? An art thing? Or just someone trying to get pictures and a little prank? To this day, I still have no idea. And I just hope that it was someone trying to have some fun, and not something more sinister. Hi, from Minneapolis, and welcome to Minnesota. Thank you. The company I work for used to have me traveling for work a lot. However, it was always to the same places because I was basically the only guy that could train people on the machines that we used. So when there was an issue with said machines, or if they hired new people that used them, I had to be there to help out. Therefore, I've always rented and I have a lot of hotel rewards points. But the reason I'm writing to you today is to share a story that you reminded me about that happened to me on one of those drives to help with a new training class. I was driving from a city on the outskirts of Minneapolis to Illinois, so not too long of a drive, but it was a pretty boring one. To be more exact, Iowa is a boring drive. Very much agree. Unless you're in Des Moines, it's pretty empty and there's not much to see. But one thing I've noticed in Iowa specifically, and maybe it's like this in other states too, but in Iowa, their bathroom stalls in the rest stops are ridiculously short, and I don't understand why. If you haven't been blessed with stopping at a rest stop in Iowa, then maybe this will help. I'm a male and about 5'7", which isn't exactly towering, but in one of those short rest stop stalls, I can literally rest my chin on top of the stall walls without even trying. Even the bottoms are raised higher, leaving maybe a 1.5 foot gap at the bottom. It's like they were designed to cover the important parts, and then everything else was just an afterthought. So anyway, there I was on this drive by myself, when nature called with that intensity that comes from too much coffee and not enough bathroom breaks. I made it just outside Des Moines, not wanting to deal with the traffic, but the closest thing available was a rest stop, so that's where I went. I pulled into one of those typical rest stop areas, and from the outside it looked totally normal. There were some old picnic tables that looked like they hadn't been used or treated since the early 90s. There was a semi parked in the truck area and a beat-up-looking sedan that looked like it had seen better decades. There was the small brick building where the restrooms were with those high fluorescent lights that make everyone look like they're dying, and the old hand dryers that do nothing but lightly breathe on you. I walked into the men's side that had the 3 urinals, 3 stalls, and the smell of industrial-strength disinfectant, mixed with something less pleasant. Basically, it was your normal side-of-the-road rest stop. It seemed empty, which was even better, so I picked the middle stall, noting again how absurdly short these things were. I have a smartwatch that connects to my phone, so when I felt my watch buzz, I looked at it. And that's when something changed. The light above me seemed to dim, like a shadow had passed overhead, but that didn't make any sense. I was inside of a windowless building with lights and definitely no sunroof, so I looked up. There was a guy staring straight down at me from above the stall partition. Eyes wide, unblinking, and locked onto mine. And to further add that this was not just some nosy or accidental glance over the wall, he had this unsettling smile. Not friendly or embarrassed like you would expect from someone who accidentally looked over a stall. No, this was deliberate. Like, predatory. His hands were gripping the top of the partition, like he had just been hanging there watching for God knows how long. For a split second, we just stared at each other, not knowing what to do, or more so just trying to process what I was seeing. Until my fight or flight response finally decided to kick in. This was creepy and unsettling and just really confusing for me. I hope none of you have been in a similar situation, but how exactly does one handle that situation? I had to try and, finish what I was doing, but also to get this man to stop staring at me. So I started by shouting at him. I remember using some very not so nice words and telling him to get the F away from me. But the guy didn't even flinch. He just continued staring at me and smiling. I stood up and quickly pulled up my pants and then brought my arm back like I was going to swing at this guy. That is when he finally pulled back. He looked back into his own stall and said in an almost disappointed tone, "Oh, sorry. I thought you were someone else." I didn't stick around to ask any questions. I called him something and then quickly left the restrooms, nearly running back to my car. My hands were shaking as I got back in and locked the doors immediately. I sat there for a good 10 minutes, engine running, watching the building. I wanted to see this guy that thought it was perfectly normal to watch people in those moments. The thing is, he never came out. So, after about 10 minutes of waiting, I had calmed down enough and told myself that I just needed to get out of there, and I left. It wasn't until I was back on the road and thinking the whole thing over when it finally hit me. No lie, he said, "I thought you were someone else." Who the hell exactly was he expecting to find in the men's restroom at a rest stop on some random evening? Was that something he just frequently did? Did he know someone else that was supposed to be there? But then I started thinking more like, what if he thought he was in the women's stalls? Was that his intention? Because that thought made me sick. Either way, this grown man was peering over a stall excitedly at me, and then thought that I was someone else. But to be honest, I'm glad that it was me over someone a little more vulnerable. I was at least able to scare the guy, and hopefully that was enough to make him not want to do what he did again. But let me tell you, I do whatever I can to not stop in Iowa. And if I have to stop, I plan for gas stations, because there is no way I am going back to one of their rest stops. Now, I want to start this write-up off a little bit differently than usual, because while I know this won't be going live until August, you are correct, Tom, I'm writing this in July. July 18th, to be exact. And I only make this so specifically known because I picked this case rather arbitrarily. And because at a glance it seemed like an interesting case with some substance to it. Well, upon diving into the meat and potatoes of the research, it was discovered that the anniversary of this case was exactly 23 years ago that day. It felt like some kind of surreal moment of pure harmony with the universe. With that being said, let's get into Alexandra Nicole Zapp's heartbreaking story. Alexandra Zapp, or Allie, received a phone call on July 18th, 2002, from a friend of hers named David Scully. He invited Allie to come to a charity sunset cruise with him, and Allie happily agreed. She met her friend that evening, and they set off on the boat for a night of dancing, drinking, and making merry. And they talked about their work, their passions, and what they hoped for in the future. Allie had recently left her job with U.S. Sailing so that she would be able to relocate to New Zealand, pursuing her dream of sailing on an America's Cup boat. While talking about her traveling plans and watching planes fly in and out of Logan International Airport, Allie told Scully, "That's what I'm going to do next. I'm going to fly planes." Allie was not originally from the East Coast. She had been born and raised in Portland, Oregon. In 1988, she did go to a boarding school in Connecticut, but once she had graduated from there, she was back in Portland attending the University of Oregon for 2 years before she accepted an editing position in New England, which saw her relocate to Boston, Mass. And Allie wasted little time getting involved in many of the charities located in her area, including the French Library, the Boston Ballet, and Courageous Sailing Center, where she taught children how to sail. In November of 2001, Allie took a job with U.S. Sailing and made the move from Boston to Newport, Rhode Island, which was where she was living the night she accepted David Scully's invitation to join him on the charity cruise. After the boat returned to the dock, Allie and Scully went to a concert at the Fleet Boston Pavilion. A little after 11 p.m., Scully drove Allie back to her car, apologetic that they had not had more to eat while they were out on the boat. In good spirits, Allie assured him that she would be fine and opened her glove compartment, showing Scully the half dozen or so power bars that she had stashed there. Besides, she told Scully, I can always stop at a Burger King on my way back to Newport. And that would turn out to be a truly fateful decision for the young woman. And sadly, while Allie could not possibly know what she was driving towards, she climbed in her vehicle, hopped on I-94, and began her trip back to her home in Newport. Once she had gotten off I-94 and onto the desolate stretch of Route 24, Allie made good on her promise to stop at a Burger King when she pulled into the Burger King rest stop in Bridgewater. Before making her way to the restaurant, she went to the public bathrooms marked open 24 hours to make her own little pit stop. But little did she know that the second she pulled into the parking lot and had gotten out of her car, she had caught the eyes of a very dangerous and impulsive predator. Though that awareness would be shattered the moment she opened the restroom door and she saw a man standing there with a knife in his right hand. Allie fought, and she fought hard. When her assailant clamped his hand over her mouth, Allie bit his fingers. When he put her in a chokehold, she clawed his forearms. She headbutted him, kicked him, and screamed, but it was no use. For all of her fierceness, the attacker was twice her size, and armed. She was stabbed numerous times in the neck and chest. Then her attacker propped her up in a bathroom stall, completely unrecognizable, as she sat with blood flowing out from where she rested. And now, this heinous assault leaves us with a very important question. Who was the monster that committed such an atrocity on a vibrant young woman like Allie Zapp? For this, we have to pivot toward the monster that they let free. We actually know a lot about Allie's killer. In fact, we pretty much know his entire life story. Although I'm not going to regale you with his entire story, we'll start where, as they say, things become relevant to the conversation. Paul Leahy, despite a fairly stable upbringing, was a high school dropout and drug addict by the time he was 18. In the wake of his mother's passing, his behavior only escalated and he became a sexually violent and deviant young man that in 1984 attacked a 13-year-old babysitter at his brother's home and essayed her while holding a knife to her throat. His story really doesn't get much better from there. Over the next several years, Leahy would spend time in and out of prison, on probation, and all the while still indulging in his deviant behavior, and each time being released back out onto the streets. Several times, judges and the justice system had chances to put this predator with no obvious signs of changing his violent and miscreant ways behind bars, and away from the young women that he seemed to enjoy tormenting so much. Each time, though, some judge would cite that the prosecution had failed to prove this, or even at one point, asking a 13-year-old girl for oral is not on the list of a sexually delineated offense spelled out in the law. Which, as an aside, is sickening. And so, once more, a predator was let loose among the unsuspecting women of New England. And while the legal arguments around Leahy were going on, he was released from prison and moved back in with his sister and her new husband. The couple shouldered the financial responsibility of Leahy's court costs, and they provided his food and cigarettes, and for the first few months, his biggest contributions were in the form of taking care of their dogs and other domestic chores around the house. Until he was able to land a job working the late-night shift at the Bridgewater Burger King, a job which his brother-in-law drove him to every night. And on the night of July 17th, 2002, on his way to work, Leahy was especially giddy because it was payday. From there, the aftermath. In the moments after the attack on Allie, an off-duty state police officer, Stephen O'Reilly, had heard Allie's last frantic screams, followed by a loud thump, and then rushing water while he was in the nearby men's restroom. He approached the women's restroom with his gun drawn. It didn't take long to spot the river and lakes of blood, and Leahy was standing at the sink with a deranged look in his eyes. When O'Reilly asked what happened, Leahy just said over and over, "I lost it." Of course, Leahy would plead not guilty of the murder, despite having been caught all but in the act. Allie's parents came to the East Coast and set up an office in the Fairmount Copley Plaza Hotel, where they began working with the Plymouth County Sheriff's Office. And this is where a lot of the truly atrocious facts about Leahy's past and the repeated releases after numerous violent crimes against the young women and girls of New England. This particular case also came at a time that was very dangerous for women in the Boston area. Just 2 days before the attack of Allie Zapp, an 18-year-old girl from Chelsea was attacked, bludgeoned, and immolated. Just hours after this, a real estate agent was attacked in the home of a would-be seller. It was also found that of the 18,000 convicted sex offenders in the states, that only 1,000 of them had ever actually been registered as they were supposed to. In court, Leahy's officer was arguing that it was not his client's intent to murder Allie. He was just deciding whether he was going to rob her or not, and his actions were all in a reaction to the situation that had spiraled out of control. Now, please, indulge me for a moment here, as I try to make a little sense of this myself. It sounds like the essence of the argument is that Leahy wanted to rob Allie, and because she fought back in self-defense, that would be why he stabbed her more than 6 times. Any way you slice it, this is a pretty foul argument for anyone to ever try to make. However, I can actually leave this particular case on a bit of a high note. For all the tragedy that comes out of this story, the shattered lives, the traumatized victims of Lee's past, and the terrible loss of young Allie Zapp's life, there are also some good things that have come of it. Changes that have been made. Oh, and Leahy, yeah, despite his lawyer's scumbag argument, Leahy is finally off the streets for good. He was found guilty of first-degree murder and is still rotting in prison, with no possibility of parole. Beyond this, I don't really have any afterthoughts to add, other than stay vigilant, stay safe, and keep fighting. Just a few years ago, my daughter and I took a road trip from our home in Kentucky to see my sister and her little family in Florida. She had just had her 3rd kid, and her oldest was just a few months older than my daughter. Our kids got to play together for a little while before they moved to Florida, but they had been so young that they didn't have much memory of it. I wanted her to know her cousins, and I, my nieces and nephews, so I was excited to go see them. I was far from wealthy, but I wasn't struggling and plane tickets were too expensive, so I just decided we could drive there. I hadn't done something like this with my daughter yet, so I thought it could be fun with the 2 of us, and just seeing how she would handle it. She was 9 at the time, so still pretty young, but she's also very observant and a curious child, so I knew it would be entertaining the whole way through. We got the car packed up the night before and then left the next morning around 6 a.m. The drive was going to be a minimum of 10 hours, but I knew that we would have to stop a few times, which would add to it, and that was fine. I was hoping we might come across some interesting places to stop along the way, too. The drive started out smoothly. My daughter, Maggie, was still in and out of sleep in the first hour or so, which helped me get out of the city quickly. Afterwards, she was fully awake and watching everything outside, asking all the questions and wanting to take pictures of everything too. So we were having a lot of fun. But, as kids do, she did start to get a little restless. So I looked for a rest stop for us to stop at and have a little lunch. I had packed a cooler full of sandwiches and lots of snacks for us to eat along the way. so I thought we could stretch out and have lunch there. We stopped right outside of Atlanta, Georgia, and the place even looked pretty nice. There were a few other cars in the parking lot and people walking around. There were some picnic tables covered by gazebos, so I suggested that we have lunch there. When we pulled in, I had my windows cracked as it was a nice day, so I could hear the small bantering from others around us. But I could also hear a man talking that was close to the building. He had one of those reflective vests on with the black shirt underneath and khakis. He was right by the entrance to the building and facing out towards the grassy area, just talking. At first glance, I assumed that he was talking to someone standing behind the large bronze statue. I think it was of a woman holding a kid or something like that. It was large enough that I couldn't see anyone or anything on the other side of it. Anyway, I saw him holding one of those long grabber arms and talking, as he would look back towards that statue. We got out of the car and started walking toward the building, and that's when I could really hear the man speaking. It sounded like he was explaining the process for picking up and taking out the trash bags, and he sounded a bit irritated as he spoke. I looked over to see who was getting the stern talking to, and to my surprise, no one was behind the statue like I thought. A little odd, but I shrugged, thinking maybe it was just him fuming about something being done wrong, or maybe the person he was talking to had walked around the building where I hadn't seen them. Either way, it was none of my concern, so we just entered the building and used the restroom. Once we finished, we left the building, saw the guy still standing nearby and talking to himself, and Maggie chose a table to sit at. We both walked back to my car, me not being comfortable with her being anywhere by herself, and we grabbed our food. We went to Maggie's table of choice, which was close to the statue. I knew she had taken a liking to it, so I wasn't surprised that she chose it. Anyway, we sat at the table and we had our sandwich, chips, and grapes. And that's when I really started paying attention to the worker. He was still constantly talking. I had a clear view of the area now, and this wasn't just muttering to himself. And there was definitely no one else around that he could have been talking to. He would say something, there would be a pause as if someone was talking, and then he would say something again. And before anyone asks, no, he wasn't even wearing some kind of earpiece. We were close enough for me to look at his face and ears when we walked in and out of the building, and as we sat with our lunch and he turned his head. I was having a hard time both keeping an eye on this guy while also paying attention to my daughter. She was talking and asking questions about where we were, but this guy was getting progressively more and more angry. His voice would get louder. He would let out one of those sarcastic, angry laughs, the ones you hear during an argument, like, huh. Unfortunately, the louder he got, the more attention Maggie was starting to pay attention to him. She asked if he was mad and who he was talking to, and I had to explain to her that I didn't know and to just focus on our lunch. But as I tried to ignore him too, he got louder, shouting things like, "Should have listened, I told you no," and some other things. I could see a few people walking around staring at him too, and Maggie was paying full attention. I could tell by her body movements that she was starting to feel uncomfortable, and I didn't like that. So I started putting everything in the bag and asked Maggie to carry her chips and hold my hand as we walked back to the car. We were back on the sidewalk leading to the parking lot when Maggie, being a child, was still staring at this man while he was yelling. He apparently made eye contact with her too when I heard him shout, "You!" and then pointed at us. He started storming toward us, and I yanked Maggie to stay behind me. My heart was pounding as he stopped right in front of us and yelled, "You just don't understand! Nobody does!" And then snatched the bag from me, threw it on the ground, and began stomping on it. I heard Maggie gasp and picked her up to hold her as the man began punching the cement trash can holder over and over. I was frozen in fear, knowing that I needed to take this time to run to my car, but I just couldn't move, and I still hate myself for that. Thankfully, there were other adults there to witness this. And soon, 2 younger guys ran up to us and stood between the man and us, telling him that he needed to leave. The angry man got in the face of one man, and I feared that I was about to watch a fight. I didn't want Maggie to see it, so I finally broke out of my stupor and dashed to the car. I got Maggie in the back seat, told her to buckle in, and closed the door, locking it. I stood by my door and watched as the 2 men walked with the angry guy toward the entrance. The angry guy continued to shout, and I heard one of the men tell him to go until the angry guy threw his hands up, flipped the bird, and walked into the building. The 3 were now inside, and I could just barely see one of the men off to the side. I got in my car and waited, wanting to make sure that everything was okay, and I calmed Maggie down. Shortly after, the 2 men walked out. One stood by the door, watching where the angry guy entered, and the other one walked down the sidewalk and grabbed my bag that I had forgotten all about. I rolled down the window, and he handed me my now dirty bag with all of our chips crushed, and the rest of our grapes and sandwiches turned to mush. I'm just glad that I only grabbed the 2 sandwiches, and I didn't pull out the entire cooler, so at least we weren't completely without. I thanked the man, and he asked us if we were okay. Maggie wasn't crying anymore and was now playing with one of the dolls that she brought, so I assumed that she was just shaken up a bit. The man explained that the guy obviously worked there, not only based on him trying to clean up and wearing the vest, but he also went into an employee office of some sort, using a code. He said that they were going to call the cops because they were concerned that he may try to do something like that again, or maybe get worse. I agreed, because his actions terrified both of us. And what if he decided to swing on someone instead of the trash bin? I don't know what was wrong with him, and I assumed it was something more than just a bad mood since he was clearly arguing with himself. I thanked him for stepping up and letting us get back to my car, but when he asked if we wanted to make a statement, I declined. I didn't want to be there any longer. I didn't want to scare Maggie anymore, and to be honest, we still had 5 or 6 hours left to drive. He understood, and he made sure we were okay once more before we left. On our way out, I actually saw 2 cops coming from the opposite direction, wondering if they were heading to that rest stop. Once back on the road, Maggie asked a few questions about the men, as expected, and then she was back to her normal self, and he even took a nap. I was able to compose myself too and was no longer shaking. The rest of the drive was fine, and even the rest stop that we went to after that was pretty empty, so no interactions with people, thankfully. I kept to gas stations as much as I could. And thankfully, we got to my sister's place with no other issues, and didn't have anything nearly as terrifying happen while we were there. So, to whoever those men were who stood up to that angry man, thank you so much, because I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't. And to the angry man, I hope you're doing better these days, but also, let's just never meet again. So that, my friends, well, is a collection of some rest stop horror stories, or scary rest stop stories, or story rest stop scary is the stories of they are. Woo! Hopefully you guys enjoyed these. They hit a little close to home. There's one, specifically, the one by Tanner, the second story in the video, that I want to address to some extent, because Tanner made some comments. One about being from Minneapolis and welcoming to Minnesota. Thank you very much. But the other is about Iowa. So, I have a very strong disdain for Iowa. I'm sorry to anyone who listens to me that listens from Iowa. I don't like your state. And the reason I want to address the stuff that Tanner said about Iowa is because Iowa is what I had to drive through every single time I came up here from Kansas or went back down to Kansas from Minnesota. And let me tell you, what is wrong with Iowa? I'm sorry. Can anyone from Iowa tell me? The restrooms at the rest stops, what Tanner said is completely accurate. I'm not a tall dude, 5'8", on a good day, probably. Maybe 5'9", if it's a really good day. I don't know, somewhere in there. My license says I'm 6'3". I'm joking, it doesn't. I'm not a tall dude. But if I can stand up and see from the rear stall in your rest stop, like I can see the toilet in the stall next to me, the urinal, the sink, the air dryer, and the door, because the stalls are less than 4 foot tall or are 4 foot tall in general, there is something wrong. And I understand that according to what I've seen online, it's to dissuade people from using drugs or, I guess, having intercourse in Iowa rest stops. Really? Do people really go to Iowa rest stops to indulge in illegal substances or indulge in adult time in rest stops off the highway in Iowa? Really? That's more of a Missouri thing. That's a joke. Anyways, my point is, Iowa, get your act together. The only rest stop that I liked in Iowa was Dow's. Dow's is a nice rest stop. And even then, the stall walls are way too short. But they do go all the way to the floor, thankfully. Just saying. Anyways, I love you guys. And if you're from Iowa, hope you know you're amazing. You are amazing. Your state sucks. Sorry. I shouldn't say that. I don't like Iowa. It's all right. Hopefully you all enjoyed these rest stop stories. I addressed everything, right? In Tanner's story, I think I did. About Iowa. I wanted to address the stall height. Anyways, hopefully you guys enjoyed the stories. If you did, please hit that like button on the video, the thumbs up. Please do subscribe to the channel if you're new and liked what you heard. Please consider leaving a comment down below with which story you thought was the scariest, or your favorite personal story, or your thoughts on Iowa. And if you're from Iowa, I want you to vehemently defend your state, please. Anyways, if you want early access, go join Patreon or the memberships, the join button down below. You can do a super thanks, which is a tip to the channel. Never expected, always appreciated. You can follow me on all my social media platforms, find other places to listen to the podcast, or submit your story by going to astheravendreams.com. You can also email me at astheravendreams@gmail.com for whatever reason. Just don't spam me. All that said, friends, I hope you have a beautiful weekend. Had a beautiful weekend. Hope you have a beautiful rest of your week. My brain's all over the place today. Beautiful rest of your week, and hope I see you again here very soon. But until then, remember that you are loved, that you are valid, and you are important, and the world is a better place with you in it. Of course, until next time, my friends, much love, and sleep well.